Good vach and welcome to BJC Mitzvah Day, number 113, part 7. A mitzvah day keeps your soul in its way. And we're continuing this quite long mitzvah entitled The Prohibition to Eat a Mixture of Meat and Milk. And again, the Chinuch goes very into it, details. So let's continue. In the case of other prohibitions, though, this is not so. For if a prohibited entity becomes mixed into a permitted piece of food, and the piece does not contain 60 corresponding units with which to nullify the prohibited entity, and afterward that piece, i.e. the one that had absorbed the prohibited entity, falls into another pot, we measure only the actual amount of the prohibited entity that fell into it. In fact, the permitted food itself will actually contribute to nullifying the prohibited entity. That is, not only is the volume of the permitted piece, which the prohibited entity originally fell into, not included when calculating the total amount of prohibited matter, but in fact the volume of the original piece is included, along with the other permitted matter in the pot, in the calculations used to determine whether the permissible food contains 60 times the prohibited food. This is because that piece did not become prohibited intrinsically as nevela is. Again, nevela in this case, the meat and milk together becomes nevela, like sort of like an unkosher piece of food, pork, whatever. And thus, the permitted portion of the piece is the same as the rest of the permitted contents of the pot. And it can contribute by being included in the calculations used to determine whether the permissible food contains 60 times the prohibited food to nullify the prohibited entity. But although the permitted portion of the piece that fell into the pot is included in the calculations used to determine whether the permissible food contains 60 times the prohibited food insofar as the contents of the pot are concerned, nevertheless, the piece itself that originally absorbed the prohibited matter and became prohibited, if it is identifiable, remains prohibited forever in the opinion of some commentaries. The Mishnah in Tamura divides items that are prohibited for benefit into two groups, those that must be buried and those that must be burned. The prohibited meat and milk mixture is listed among those items that must be buried. Chinuch addresses a case of a prohibited meat and milk mixture that had been burned. The sages of blessed memory stated in Tamura that the ashes of a meat and milk mixture that was burned are prohibited for all use, as is the law regarding the ashes of all those items that are prohibited for benefit that require burial. Let's see if we have time for another. Okay, the next part is a little bit longer, so we'll stop here. Thanks for listening to Sponsor Future Mitzvah 3600 of the Gold. See you tomorrow.